Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you a first look at the new flagship APS-C body from Fujifilm, and that is the X-T3. I've been spending some time with this, and of course Fuji is a new system for me, so I'm spending some time getting familiar with it and kind of comparing it in terms of the handling and the use and the functionality to bodies I'm more familiar with from Canon and Sony, etc. And so today, however, I'm going to take you both on a close look at some of the specifications, as well as giving you a demonstration of how everything kind of works in terms of all of the various functions and dials and buttons and switches that are on here. And so if you are considering the X-T3, this could be a great primer for you to get a sense of how the camera actually functions and if it might be a camera for you. And so let's jump in. Let's take a closer look at the new Fujifilm X-T3 body. So let's jump in and let's take a closer look at the new Fujifilm X-T3. So this is on their third generation of this camera body, which in many ways is the flagship for them when it comes to the overall performance. Now, Fujifilm's approach to mirrorless is that they have concentrated their efforts on maximizing an APS-C sensor in a camera like this. And so you have a crop factor of around 1.5 times APS-C sensor. But they have developed a sensor. This is an X-Trans back illuminated sensor, a 26.1 megapixel sensor that is delivering image quality that is superior to, well, basically anything that I've ever seen out of APS-C before. And they believe that really is competitive with a full frame sensor. Now, that being with the limitation of understanding that max ISO in the normal range is 12,800. And I will, in a subsequent episode, I'll see how this compares both to another APS-C sensor in the Sony a6500, but then also how it compares to, maybe another full frame sensor at the higher ISO levels. And so they certainly have, however, developed it's not a Bayer type sensor, and so this X-Trans filter does really deliver pretty stunning image quality. And so more on that in the future. But of course their approach beyond that in mirrorless is that they jump right over 35 millimeter full frame and go straight to a medium format. But this, as far as their, kind of APS-C, or, and in this case, really full frame, this is the flagship in terms of the performance. And so in the US market, this is a $1,500 camera here. As you can see, it really is somewhat of a classic rangefinder type design. Those of you that grew up with a lot of different cameras in the film era, this is going to have a lot of familiarity in some ways, and maybe even some sentimental value for that. And they certainly are maximizing the look. This is the silver edition. You can get a black version that maybe looks a little less rangefinder-ish, but because of not having the silver accents. But I kind of like the look of this one here. And so this underneath the hood, however, this is anything but vintage. It has now 4 different CPUs for faster image processing, so there's no lag in writing at this point. So just for the moment, we'll jump in here and we'll take a look here. You've got an option of a mechanical shutter or an electronic shutter, or some combination of the two. And so if I switch into the mechanical shutter mode, we'll find that we have a frame rate of, let's go, 11 frames per second is what it comes up to, and as you can see, still no lag in writing, and I am doing full-size RAW files right now. So when you're shooting RAW files like that, you can buffer up to 42 RAWs, and so obviously you can fill that up really quick, right around 4 seconds worth you can fill up the buffer. If you're shooting JPEGs, you can get 145 JPEGs. Now, if you're shooting with that electronic shutter, you have the option with the electronic shutter to go into a couple of different modes, up to where you can go into you can get 20 frames per second at full no crop with the electronic shutter, but you can go to a 1.25 times kind of sports crop mode, and you can then go as high as 30 frames per second. And so you can get a little bit more in the buffer because of that bit of a crop factor. But, you know, obviously at the 30 frames per second, you're going to fill that buffer with RAWs really, really, really quick. And so anyway, but, you know, in terms of the performance, there's a lot going on there in terms of that performance. And of course, if you're using the electronic shutter, your advantage with the electronic shutter is that you have, you know, you can be completely silent in operation. And so I took a photo, you heard nothing, there's no blackout, and that is one of the nice things, both the LCD and the viewfinder, is that you're not having blackout issues. And so anyway, certainly some advantages there that are better than anything that I've seen on mirrorless previously. I also really like what you've got going on under the hood when it comes to some of the video functionality here. And so under video, you have the option, if you're shooting in the H.264 codec compression, you have the option of going all the way up to, a 60 frame per second 4K, and you've got some options there of how high. Now at the 60 frames per second, you can go as high as 200 megabits per second, but if you're shooting at some of the other kind of compressions or, you know, resolutions, you have the option of going higher, particularly if you go to the H.265, and then you have some other compression options, and so here now, if I'm in this, I have the option of going into an even higher 400 megabit per second. So a lot of flexibility when it comes to that. You can also shoot at 1080. You can shoot a 120 frames per second at full HD, and so obviously get some great slow-mo there. You also have the option here of, really a whole lot of options when it comes to the actual video functionality. You can really control things in a lot of ways. You also have F-Log built into it, and so you can do log recording, and that is at a base ISO of ISO 640. And so anyway, you know, a lot of good things going on when it comes to the actual movie output here, or movie modes. You also have the option of doing a simultaneous clean HDMI out while shooting in camera. So a lot of great stuff when it comes to that. And so in terms of the actual specs of what the camera can do, a lot of, you know, pretty fantastic things there. You have, in terms of the sensor and the focus system, a lot of different ways you can customize this focus system, but the focus system itself is 2,160,000 phase detect points over the entirety of the sensor. And so if you can see here, you can see that the boxes, here I have the whole sensor being able to be detected on. Well, you can see that it goes right off into the extreme corners, and so pretty fantastic there. The sensitivity is down to a -3 EV, which is basically moonlight, so that's quite good. It does have both face and eye detect autofocus, and one thing that I noted that I thought was kind of cool about the way that it's set up here is you actually have an option of prioritizing either the right or the left eye. So maybe if you're shooting portraits and that's, you know, you're wanting to prioritize because of your pose in a certain way, that is a pretty cool option right there in terms of the eye and face detect. Now, I think that Sony's IAF is still a little bit more sophisticated than what we've got here. It seems to work well, but doesn't seem to track the eye quite as exceptionally as what Sony does in their most recent third-gen bodies. But it's doing a really good job. And the other thing that I did note is that in terms of the actual smoothness of video transitions, now it could be somewhat lens specific here. This is the 35mm f2 that I've got on here right now. And so I do find that its focus shifts are a little bit abrupt. And now don't read too much into that, because I have seen smoother focus transitions, and I've tried playing with the settings, but it could be just the nature of this lens itself, and there may be other lenses. I'm not as familiar with the Fuji ecosystem and a variety of lenses yet. There may be other lenses that are smoother in their transitions. And so anyway, that's just one observation, and that's an area where, to my findings so far, that Canon is still at the top of the heap with their DPAF and that functionality. Now, looking at some more of the physical aspects here, you do have the option to have a touch to focus AF in both video and stills modes. And so that's nice, because that's something that you don't have on Sony. You do have it on Canon, but on Sony, you only get touch AF during video mode. And so I do like that. And you can also do the touch and grab in different autofocus modes. So if you've got your eye up to the viewfinder, you can put a thumb on the screen and drag it around to select your autofocus point. So some good things when it comes to that there. Now, like Sony, you have the option to tilt the screen at differing positions, but unlike Sony, you do have a little bit better versatility in that if you click the button on the side, you have the ability to release this out, and so it actually has some usefulness also in portrait mode, which is something that Sony lacks. Of course, the best articulating screen is really on the new Canon EOS R that has a fully articulating touchscreen. So Canon's still a little bit ahead when it comes to the actual functionality of the touchscreen. And one of those areas is that in menus, you cannot do any kind of navigating on the touchscreen. You have to use a joystick or directional pad to accomplish that. But a lot of good things going on here. The LCD itself is it's a 3.2 inch, a little over 1 million dots per inch on the LCD itself. So, for example, the A7R Mark III has a little bit higher resolution LCD, but the actual viewfinder itself is a 3.69 million dot OLED, which is really actually fantastic. That's along with the A7R Mark III. That extra clarity is great, particularly if you're like magnifying the image in the viewfinder, say if you're shooting in a manual focus mode or whatever. And so that's certainly a big plus, because I enjoy that higher resolution, something that the A7 III or the A6500 lack. It has a 100 frames per second refresh rate with no blackout. So good things happening in terms of the viewfinder. I also like the design of the cup here. That is the eye cup, which suits the eye nicely. I don't have it mounted on here, but it does come with a little flash that if you happen to bring it along, you can mount. It comes as a part of the kit itself. Now let's look a little bit more at some of the other physical aspects here, give you a little bit of tour here. Certainly this has more physical controls than really any mirrorless body that I've used. And these are kind of a lot of times dual layer here. And so you have on the top, you have a control dial. This one here is for the ISO. So you can shift it into an auto ISO type mode, or you can select ISO here. Now, unlike others that have you hold down the center button and then rotate, this is actually a lock and release. And so right now I have it released, and so I can select an ISO. I click it again, and it's now locked in place. Just a little bit different approach. So your base ISO is 160 up to 12,800. You can expand on the low end to ISO 80, and then you can expand on the high end to, I believe, 51,000 and whatever that variant is on the upper end there. And so you have that, but beneath here you actually have another switch that will allow you to select different modes. You know, for example, here you can switch between video mode, you can bracket exposures, you can go to high speed continuous, you can go to low speed continuous, single shot. You can then also go into some of the advanced modes like filters, if you're wanting to do that, panorama, those type things there. And so that's certainly nice and functional. Likewise is this dial here, and so on the top you could be selecting shutter speed through that, or you can switch into kind of an aperture priority, or in this case where I'm controlling shutter speed from within the body itself. And of course, with the dials, you can set these up to do these different functionalities, and so that's certainly useful there. In this case, the actual switch underneath allows you to select your metering modes, and so that is useful there. You also have an EV exposure, so if you're in AV mode, for example, you can quickly dial in exposure compensation in either direction up to plus or minus 3 EV. That's a very, very practical, handy thing to have. I also like the fact that you've got a couple of function buttons, one here, easy to grab in either position, and so you can actually program a variety of functions to those. Likewise with these buttons back here, they're an auto exposure lock or an autofocus lock, and so you can set them up as that or program tons of other functionality to those. Nice feeling dials here on either the front and the back. The shutter button is kind of a vintage feeling shutter button type there that I kind of like, and I like the sensitivity of it. I find it easier to control when I'm in burst mode, whether I'm taking a single shot or multiple shots. It has a little bit better fine-tuned sensitivity than some others I've seen. You've got another dial here on the front that is another kind of redundant way of choosing between manual focus, continuous autofocus, or single shot. And so also nice to have, and it's a quick way to get into manual focus, which I really like for a mirrorless body. Underneath this little port here, you have a sync cable port, but you have to watch out because this little thing the port cover does not stay attached. It's quite small. It kind of pops off at that final release, and so it's going to be the first thing that a lot of people are going to lose. Taking a further look at the tour here, along this side you have got a remote shutter release cable. Underneath this door here, we have dual SD slots, and so fortunately these are UHS 2 compatible, and that's certainly recommended to get the faster write speeds there. On the other side, underneath this port, you have got both a mic input and a headphone monitoring jack. Awesome for if you're doing video. You've got a USB-C type connector where you can also not only connect and transfer images, but it can be charged via this, which has already come in really handy for me because I was shooting at an event. I only had one card. My card was dying. Fortunately, I had a remote or like a little power bank with me that I was able to plug that in and get through my event. HDMI port, which is a micro HDMI, is down there. Down on the bottom, a couple of other things to note. You have got your battery release port. Now, this is one of the vulnerabilities here. The battery is rated at 390 frames or 40 minutes of 4K. Now, I will say, so far having used this, I think that I'm getting a little better battery life than what I have out of like the A6500. But certainly this is an area I think where Fuji can build on this, design a larger capacity battery pack like Sony has. And you know what? And if you add a little bit more to the grip, I certainly wouldn't be offended by that if you have reasonable size hands as I do. You know, with these mirrorless bodies, you've got a orphaned pinky, and you know, you can use a little bit meatier a grip, and so I certainly wouldn't have a problem with that personally. So a lot of great stuff there. There is also under this, there is a port if you're wanting to connect on an additional battery grip, which you can, and of course that's a way to get a more hefty area to hold on to like that. It's a magnesium alloy body here. It is weather sealed. So as you can see, there's actually a whole lot here that I like about this body, and I've been able to pick up the functionality really quite quickly. Fuji has a little bit different way of labeling some things, just like every manufacturer does, but once I've figured it out, I've been able to really set up the camera in a way that I really like. I like the ergonomics and the physical controls, and I've been able to put things where I like them, and as I become more familiar with it, I'm liking it more and more. I'm also really impressed with the image quality and what I'm getting off of the camera, both with this, you know, relatively inexpensive 35mm f2, and then of course also with this beast that I've been shooting with as well. And so if you look in the description down below, you can actually find linkage to an image gallery and see what I'm talking about. This really produces beautifully detailed, beautifully colored images. So check out that image gallery and you'll find a lot of photos there that will give you a sense of what the camera is capable of. I will be coming back also with a subsequent episode where I'm really going to run the camera through some formal tests to see how the sensor performs, dynamic range, performance at high ISO, you know, how highly it's actually resolving images, and show you a little bit closer look at that, you know, that kind of thing. And so stay tuned for that. That will be coming in the near future. In the meantime, also, if you're looking to purchase one for yourself, I've got some buying links to various retailers in the description down below. Also there, you can follow me on social media, become a patron, sign up for my newsletter, and if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.